And it looks like we are live. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you guys are listening to this after the fact. Thank you all for joining us here on a wonderful Friday night. Make sure we get everybody in here. Let the stream breathe for just a second. Mile high hello, everybody in Broncos country. Welcome into another episode of the Dove Valley Deep Divers podcast. I am your host, Lance Sanderson, and joining me as per usual is my good friend and colleague. He is Mile High Huddle's senior NFL draft analyst, the one and only Erick Trickel. Dude, things really got kind of into a frenzy yesterday afternoon when the Broncos released, 5 or 6 different coaches that Sean Payton has brought into his coaching staff, highlighted obviously by Davis Mills being the quarterback. No, I'm just playing. It's highlighted obviously by the return of Vance Joseph, the defensive coordinator for this team. I got an opportunity to kind of take a look at some stuff regarding what he did with the Arizona Cardinals. I know you put a whole bunch of stuff out on your Twitter account, but before we get into all that, man, how are we doing?
Doing good. Extremely tired. I mean, this time of year, things start really get cranking for the NFL draft. The NFL Combine starts on Tuesday with, people starting to arrive in the interviews and all that and the press conferences. So I'm excited and getting all the prep stuff for that and getting started on putting out scouting reports. There's already been quite a few put up. And so busy time of year, and it's definitely taking its toll on me as it does every single year.
Well, this whole stretch from January through early May, obviously with the NFL draft there, and then you do a whole bunch of after draft stuff like that, guys that you thought should have been drafted that weren't, doing some analysis on all the picks and everything like that. But I've obviously been doing a lot more work in this year's class, trying to stay caught up with everybody and just be better as an analyst this year. And I'm really doing a good job on that, and I'm excited to really kind of join in on that grind this year with you and really just provide more for everybody here on Dove Valley Deep Divers and across the Mile High Huddle community. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm really enjoying the process so far, and creating my own boards and doing a new scouting report, a new scouting system, grading scale, the whole 9 yards. It's been a lot of fun. We had David jumping in here right off the bat. David Cromwell, what's up, dude? Nice to see you, man. It's always fun to have you in the chat. $5 super chat. Thank you for that. We appreciate it. I know we have a ways to go, but would you consider a safe bet that the Broncos would be picking more than 5 times in the NFL draft? Erick, what do you think, man?
Yeah, I do. Despite my opinion that they shouldn't really, trade all these guys, they are shopping them. They're going to shop them. Garrett Bowles is going to get shopped. Courtland Sutton's going to get shopped. They're looking for ways to add additional draft picks to to their arsenal that they have to make their selections to improve this team. And there's also a good chance with those back-to-back third-round picks, they'll probably trade one of those away as move down to get additional draft picks. So I think it's a safe bet that they'll probably make about 7 picks in this draft, I think.
I agree with you on that one. I think they might actually move out of one of those third-round picks that they have right now and probably see if they can't get a couple of, a 4th and 5th round or maybe a 6th round pick in there as well. But the big thing is Courtland Sutton. It seems like there's a lot of buzz about him potentially being moved. There was a big rumor from Benjamin Albright, kind of more of a speculation or a guess than an actual report there. But it sounds like the potential scenario would be if the Jets got Aaron Rodgers, then it would be the Broncos sending Courtland Sutton and a 4th round pick in 2024 to the Jets.
That was just Ben throwing out.
Right.
There's nothing substantial to it. There's nothing behind it. It was Zach Wilson and Denzel Mims for Courtland Sutton and a 4th. Like it was no offense against Ben or anything like that. It's just a dumb idea. Like something to generate conversation on his Twitter account.
Yeah. Michael jumping in here. Good evening, Lance and Erick on Dove Valley Deep Divers. Go Broncos and buck 'em. And obviously, Michael, it's always a great time to have you in the chat as well. Thank you all for joining us here. Got a couple of other guys I want to shout out before we come back to that Courtland Sutton trade idea, because I got some thoughts on that as well. We've got William Hayes in the house, Greg Smith as well. Obviously, Scott's running the 1s and 2s behind the scenes tonight, so thanks, Scott, for joining us as well. William Catalano in here, Dave Yunkin as well, Mike S. as well. First, No Fear, got a question coming in here. We'll grab that here in just a few minutes, but a name that's new to me, I'm not recognizing it off the top of my head, Dominique Martin jumping in here. So thank you, Dominique, for joining us tonight. First time in the chat. Maybe you come back around and ask us another big question. It says, go Denver. We can't speak on how much this podcast means to real Broncos fans because we would be modest. Broncos for life. And thank you, Dominique. We appreciate that, man. Going back to Courtland Sutton, I don't think that the hypothetical trade that Ben was kind of throwing out there for interaction, I like the thinking behind it, because you move on from an asset in Courtland Sutton that, to me, I think it would be better off if you tried to move Tim Patrick coming off the injury. Not that there's going to be a lot of added value there, but you're moving on from a guy that you already have at least a carbon copy clone of in Tim Patrick and Courtland Sutton. One of those guys can move, opens up a spot to get Jerry Jeudy in the fold a little bit more, opens up a spot to get KJ Hamler on the field and just stretch this field vertically a little bit more. But it also brings you in I'm not going to say high quality backup player, but a player that has a lot of high upside in Zach Wilson, and upgrade the backup quarterback room. And potentially even with a Sean Payton, a guy that does a really good job of scheming things up for his quarterback, that might be a resurrection project that I'm very interested in, although I probably wouldn't do this deal. Eric, what do you think on that?
So at what point, how long does a player have to be in the NFL before we get away from high upside players?
I would like to see 2 full seasons of a starter, and I know that Zach Wilson has the majority of that.
Okay. No. I'm talking about Denzel Mims, who can't even make it as a starter. Mm-hmm. And high upside guy like Zach Wilson, sure, he might have still some potential there and everything, but like his play has never really been good in the NFL.
Right.
And at least Courtland Sutton, you have proven, ability there. Granted, even after the injury, it's been there, but hasn't quite been that level before he got hurt. So, like, I don't know. This trade, I get the idea behind trading Courtland Sutton, but this trade is just it's just something that was made for interaction on Twitter, throwing out a random thought and everything like that. And it's a bad one, to put it nicely.
I don't disagree with that. You don't move on from a quality player like Courtland Sutton and get back a player that hasn't been able to stick around in the NFL and actually have an impact like a Denzel Mims.
And Mims has played less than 1,000 snaps over 3 years, to highlight the fact that he can't get out there on the field.
Yeah, loved him coming out of the draft out of Baylor. Phil McLaughlin jumping in here. Good evening, Lance, Eric, and Deacon Scott. Can you guys explain to me why we hire a quarterbacks coach younger than our quarterback, who wasn't that good when he played and was much more a short pass quarterback? Hashtag MHH for life, and fuck him. God, you gotta really be careful saying that on the air, because we may not be bound by FCC regulations, but man, it sounds really bad. I understand that it's supposed to be the play on words there, but dude, I got to be careful saying that. Eric, Davis Mills, man, what do you think about him?
So the one thing about it is a player's ability on the field doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a good coach or a bad one. Mm-hmm. So, and Davis Webb, not Davis Mills.
I said Davis Mills.
Davis Webb was always touted as being a very bright quarterback. He just understands the game. All these things that you typically hear about quarterbacks that aren't going to make it in the NFL as a player, but you see them on the sidelines after a point. Davis Webb has done a lot during his career as a player to help out quarterbacks. He helped with Josh Allen in Buffalo. He was a big help for Daniel Jones this last year. So the dynamic between a older quarterback who's going to be 30, 35, I think at some point this year, maybe 34, and a 27-year-old former quarterback, no experience actually as a coach, is going to be interesting, but I don't care about how Davis Webb was as a player. He's bright. He worked with Patrick Mahomes in college, dude. There was 2 years there at Texas Tech backing him up, and reports going back to then was that Davis Webb was helping Patrick Mahomes there in college as well, picking things up, picking up the game plan and things like that. So he's got a history of, even as a player, helping these guys. And what's said about him is that it's how he explains it, is that it's just easy for guys to grasp and pick up on and remember.
Yeah. And you don't need to look any further across the NFL. Obviously, Davis Webb, and I do apologize for saying Davis Mills earlier, but Davis Webb, you don't need to look across the NFL to find a couple of options that have been backup quarterbacks that went on to be offensive coaches. Primarily speaking, the new offensive coordinator in Los Angeles for the Chargers, Kellen Moore. He was a backup quarterback in the NFL for a few seasons, went in to be a quarterback's coach for, I believe, Dak Prescott in Dallas, before then eventually being hired as the offensive coordinator there. He had a meteoric rise as a coach. There's a guy on the Broncos currently right now that everyone is saying he's not going to be a great NFL quarterback. Eventually, he's going to get into coaching, and he's going to be a high-quality quarterbacks coach in Brett Rippon. So it's not that far-fetched to see guys that don't have NFL success as a quarterback come back, be a young offensive coach, whether it's a quality control assistant, whether it's a passing game coordinator, a quarterbacks coach, or even eventually on to being an offensive coordinator. So to me, the one thing that, and I'm going to agree with you on this, Eric, not to bounce it back, but the one thing that I'm very interested in is you've got a very, I don't want to say egotistical because that's probably not the right word, but a very legacy-based understanding quarterback in Russell Wilson who wants to do what he wants to do. And then you've got a young coach that's not doing it for the first time. And maybe there is a little bit of vitriol between those two. So that relationship's going to be interesting to kind of take the pulse of. But I think when you have a guy like Sean Payton, who has all of the respect of everybody across the NFL standing over the top of that, that's not going to be necessarily a huge talking point that we need to worry about until we need to worry about it. Paul jumping in here, $10. Eric, do you want to bounce off of that, or do you want to move to Paul here?
Yeah,
okay, so Paul jumping in here. Thanks you for that, Paul. $10 super chat. We appreciate you for joining us. First off, boo Iowa super chat. Absolutely, always boo Iowa. Thanks for all you do, Lance, Eric, and Scott. We enjoy these pods so much. So thank you, Paul. We appreciate you for joining us, man. Sticking on the offensive side of the football here, there's obviously the big connection here. I believe it was yesterday, shortly after it was announced that Vance Joseph was going to be the defensive coordinator. The Broncos also brought in former Saints offensive coordinator, worked a couple different stints with Sean Payton. He was a former offensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Chargers as well this last season, Joe Lombardi. Now, Eric, this one was kind of interesting to me. It wasn't a surprise by any stretch of the imagination, but given what we know about Joe Lombardi and the way that he wants to really focus in on the quicker passing game, getting the ball out quick, not taking a whole lot of super deep shots and stuff like that, I understand this is going to be Sean Payton's offense, and that's what he's going to do is try to mold this around what Russell Wilson wants to do. But what about Joe Lombardi here, man? What's his role going to be? Is it an offensive coordinator or just kind of a passing game coordinator? Do you know anything about that?
No, right now, I mean, his status is still like he's going to be on the Broncos coaching staff, but his role is still to be determined. There's been rumors going around that he'll be the offense coordinator, other rumors that he'll be the assistant quarterback coach and the passing game coordinator. Mm-hmm. And Denver's still looking for a running back coach as well. So there's definitely options for it and things that Joe Lombardi can fit on. And everyone always figured that he's going to be on the staff at some point. But who or just where he will be is the question. And from what I understand, what I've seen, what people have reported is that there's still what's the right word here? There's still a desire, I guess, to try and pull Anthony Lynn away from the 49ers to fill in that offensive coordinator position, which could be why Joe Lombardi's position is still up in the air, even though he will be employed by the Broncos.
Right. So correct me if I'm wrong here. I believe Anthony Lynn, obviously former head coach of the Chargers. He was there in Buffalo, I believe, as an offensive coordinator there for a little while as well. But right now he's currently the run game coordinator for the 49ers. Is that right? I think
he's the running backs coach and the assistant head coach.
Okay, I thought that he was the run game coordinator in there as well. But that to me is a very interesting hire if the Broncos can figure out a way to do that because of what he does. Obviously, another former player that played with the Broncos there for a while back in the 90s, believe won 2 Super Bowls with the Broncos as well. So he's got that pedigree. Championship pedigree is something you always want to have with former players that come into coaches and just coaches in general. But with him, his ability to scheme up a running game with what he did with the Chargers there for a while, and obviously what he did with the Bills back before he was the head coach of the Chargers, I really like what he brings to the fold in that capacity.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Gary Palmer comes in with a $9.99 donation. Thank you, Gary. We appreciate that. He says, hello, Lance, Eric, Scott, and Broncos country. Love the speculation and analysis. MHH for life. #Buckham. Definitely, Gary. Thank you for joining us. And
Thanks,
we're glad that for your consistent support week in, week out. As well as everybody else's. And then Anthony Lynn, I think, would be an interesting hire. He had 2 stints with the Broncos there as a player, won 2 Super Bowls with them. And then when he got into coaching, the first team he was the coach for he was an assistant special teams coach for the Broncos. So he's definitely familiar with the area. He's familiar with the team. I mean, granted, the ownership has completely changed and not many familiar faces around, but he's familiar with, how things in the Broncos, the organization as a whole likes to be done, even with new owners. Like some stuff's still going to be kept around a little bit. So some of the traditions there in Denver. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting hire. I'll be curious to see what the 49ers are doing, because they allowed a couple of their guys to go and follow DeMeco Ryans down to Houston. So it'll be interesting if they'll keep their staff open for other teams as well.
Yeah. I think that bringing in Anthony Lynn for the experience on the offensive side of the football is going to be kind of paramount here, because you wanted to talk about this before we switch over to the defensive side of the football. It's very interesting to see how Sean Payton is starting to mold this staff. Obviously, you've got Joe Lombardi, who he has a lot of experience with, but you've got Davis Webb, who is a first-time quarterbacks coach. You've got Kerry Colbert, who is a former Broncos wide receiver that they're bringing in to be the wide receivers coach. Zach Strief, who was an offensive line coach and assistant for the New Orleans Saints. I believe this is his first time as a full-time offensive line coach. Declan Doyle, he spent the last 4 seasons as an offensive assistant in New Orleans, 3 of those underneath Sean Payton, but this is his first time being a tight ends coach. You've got a lot of inexperience as far as the position coaches are concerned. And to me, we've already played this song and dance with Nathaniel Hackett before, where we've got a lot of young coaches that don't necessarily know the ropes of what you have to do being a coach here. On the defensive side of the ball, everybody, and special teams, everybody has a lot of experience. And we'll get to that here in just a second. But I'm curious your thoughts on just the inexperience and the youth of this offensive coaching staff, because I see some flaws and maybe some fatal flaws at that.
Yeah, I mean, so far, every one of them, I mean, Kerry Colbert's the only one who's been a wide receivers coach before, and that was in college. They've never been the guy in the NFL as their position coach, which is really interesting to see. I mean, but for me, like, I'm not super worried about that, because who's going to be overseeing the offense, really? Sean Payton. It's his offense. And so, like, he's going to be able to he's taking these risks on these inexperienced guys that he could try to build up a little bit and, help develop them while they and sit there and continue to install a scheme and be the head coach of it. And then on the opposite side of the ball, where he's going to be very hands-off, he's going for experienced guys, because that's not his side of the ball. Not that he can't coach it. It's just he's going to be focused on the offense. The big thing for the Broncos is getting their offense to turn things around. Same with special teams. Like, they got to turn the special teams around. So he turned to some trusted guys that he has on special teams. They brought in a former player that had a couple really good years on special teams under Sean Payton as the assistant special teams coach, and Chris Banjo. They brought in the 2 guys, the assistant head coach, Mike Westhoff, who's also going to help oversee special teams. So it's a thing of that with where he's going to be focusing at, again, going with inexperienced guys and then going to the experienced guys on the opposite sides of the ball and everything, which every time a first-time head coach, what is it that we always talk about? As they can do whatever they want on their side of the ball, pretty much. Grain of salt on that one a little bit. But on the opposite side of the ball, they need experience. You can't go a first-time defensive coordinator for a first-time offensive coordinator turned to head coach. Denver had success with that last year, but a lot of that was because of the players that were in place and just finding the right guy for them to help them out, because it was a defense built by Vic Fangio, a big defensive guy. So it doesn't always work out, but it's always nice to see coaches go with experience on the opposite side of the ball that they coach.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm totally here with you on that one. This actually makes a really good pivot point here, so we can switch over to the defensive side of the football, because we got Naj jumping in here. First time I've seen Naj in a while, man. What's up, dude? You were so much fun at the meet and greet a couple years ago. We actually got yelled at for swearing a little bit too loudly as the podcast was going. But anyways, Naj jumps in here, $20 super chat off the top rope, dude. What's going on? He says, "Hey, brothers, the VJ hiring has been quite polarizing. Sounds like he desperately wanted to be in Denver. I love that, and I hope he crushes it. Do you see the team focused on needs in the 3rd round or the best player available?" To me, I think best player available, regardless of position, and hopefully you can find one at a position of need, is the way you go into the draft as terms of overall strategy, regardless of the year. If you're drafting for need, to me, it's never the best idea, because don't let a good player stop you from taking a great player. Fortunately, where the Broncos are at currently in the draft in the third round, they're going to be able to find some guys that are going to fill some needs. There's some cornerback talent there. Julius Brents is a guy that I know, Eric, you really like a lot. I like him a lot as well. There's some edge players that are going to be there, guys like Zach Harris from Ohio State, Adi Abidaware from Northwestern is there. Both of those guys are kind of bigger body edge players that are probably 3-point stance edge players, guys who play on the 5 technique, stuff like that. You're going to find some linebackers, some coverage linebackers that are there, like a Dayon Henley. Maybe you wait for a little bit and get a Mahmoud Diabate. But Eric, I want your thoughts on this. First things first, let's talk about VJ and the scheme specificity of the players that you're looking for. And do you think that there's some players in that third round area, 67, 68, where the Broncos are going to have an opportunity to upgrade this roster and get some starters on the field?
Well, first of all, Naj, thank you for the donation. We really appreciate that.
Thanks,
and then, yeah, I mean, Vance Joseph hiring, it's going to be quite polarizing. I mean, he failed as a head coach, and a lot of fans have a lot of, anger still, I guess would be the best way to put it, at him for it. But there seems to be this disconnect about his defenses. And I mean, a lot of people are looking at, the flat stats like yards allowed per game, rush yards allowed per game, things like that. Mm-hmm. But there's better statistics out there. And Vance Joseph hasn't done a terrible job during his time as a defensive coordinator. In Miami, they were 20th in DVOA his year, which isn't great, but that's a year after they were 28th. So he improved them quite a bit with not having a lot of talent on that defense.
Right.
And that's the thing that rings true with Vance Joseph, is that he has consistently done well outside of his time in Denver, really, with not a lot of talent to work with on the defense, on the defensive side of the ball. And then Denver was in Arizona. They were 20th his first year. Then they rose up to 10th, then 6th. And then last year, when everything fell off, they were 24th, but everything fell off. Injuries piled up on it, and he had to kind of change his defensive scheme around. Now, going to your question about what the mainstay of his defense is, press man and blitz. That is what Vance Joseph loves to do. He used to be a pretty heavy zone guy, but he's kind of changed a little bit over the years, especially during his time, towards the end of Denver, the beginning of his time in Arizona. He started to go to more as a press man. On third down, he's going to play a lot of cover one, and he's going to blitz you. That's just his bread and butter. And there's a lot of guys in this draft. I mean, you name some of them, Julius Brents, who can be a physical press man corner. I mean, you got Patrick Surtain, who has some of the best, if not the best, press technique in the NFL. He's been made for a press man coverage scheme. You've got a good safety in Justin Simmons that can help you play a cover one defense. Like, a lot of pieces for this heavy cover one, heavy man coverage in general defense that Vance Joseph likes to use. They have, and it's just finding a couple of those guys. And I think that going towards the best player available, position of need, it's never one or the other. It's kind of a mixture of them. If you have, unless a guy who's way up on your board, super high, that's not really a position of need, happens to fall, it's typically going to be one of the better players, one of the top players you have on your board that happens to be at a position of need. That's just typically the way it is in the NFL. Outside of like picking in the top 5, like where you like, this guy is just so good, we can't pass him up. Like, say a team has great edges and they're picking first or second overall, like Will Anderson should be a pick for them. Like, as long as they have a quarterback, whatever. A lot goes into it. Go ahead.
There's a couple of things that I really like what you said there. I watched a game. I didn't get an opportunity to do a whole really big deep dive this afternoon, but I did watch the game against Seattle earlier this season, week 6, before the Cardinals really got like decimated with injuries on the defensive side of the football. You still got to see a lot of Isaiah Simmons, a lot of Zaven Collins. Marcus Golden was still playing at a pretty high level there coming off of the edge. JJ Watt was still playing at a really high level in that particular game. Their cornerbacks is one where I was like, I just don't know here. A big thing that you had said was you're seeing a lot of press man stuff, and you're absolutely correct there. And a big thing that you're seeing with that is press man, and then they're also using their linebackers in a lot of man coverage as well. So to me, that is a problem for this Broncos defense right now. Coming in here, if you're going to have a lot of man coverage guys, you need some guys with a little bit more longer speed than what they have. And as William Hayes says here, they need a stout linebacker too, a guy that can actually play with some meat in the middle of the defense when they like when Vance Joseph likes to sugar up the A gaps and bring A gap pressure. Linebacker play, man. What do you think that the Broncos, outside of what I just kind of got there, what do you think the Broncos are going to be looking for there? Because Alex Singleton is a free agent. You don't know what Jonas Griffiths is going to look like coming off of his injury-marred season this last year. Josie Jewell's getting up there a little bit and has never really been the high-quality man coverage linebacker. Is that a big position of need for you?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to be hunting for an athletic linebacker. Vance Joseph loves athletic, versatile linebackers. There's a couple guys in there. He loves hybrids, those off-ball, those edges, the cover guys. He likes the hybrids of those types of linebackers. He loves those safety linebacker hybrids. Those are guys that he likes to use. So there's definitely guys in this draft that can fit that you can go after and out there and get. Those guys, if they're typically worth it, don't end up becoming free agents very often. And if they do become a free agent, it's again because they're not worth it. They're just not very good. So I think that there's enough in the linebacker room if you bring Alex Singleton back that you can work in Vance Joseph's scheme, but you definitely need to invest in some way an athletic guy. And athleticism's not everything. He's got to be brainy. He's got because brains in my opinion are more important than overall athleticism at the linebacker position, especially in the modern NFL. So you got to find this breed of linebacker that's rather difficult to find. They don't come across often. You can get lucky, and there's a couple of guys this year that stand out that in that third or fourth round that can fall into it, though they may never reach, that star level. They can be solid starters.
Yeah, I mentioned Deion Henley from Washington State. He's a guy that I really have my eyes on as a coverage linebacker there. But there's one that I know specifically that you thought should have been invited to the combine. It had a really good, I believe it's the Shrine game from Sacramento State or San Francisco or something like that.
Bowl that got called up to the Senior Bowl.
Okay, you know who I'm talking about though, Marte Mapu. Yep. So for him, Eric, I know that you have been watching him a lot here lately, and have really kind of sung his praises in our group chat. Speak about him, man. What is this player? I know that you said he's kind of that safety linebacker hybrid. Is this a target for Vance Joseph?
I mean, he should be. The issue with him is that there's not enough, despite being a physical player, he doesn't bring enough oomph into blocks when he engages on the block. So life as a full-time linebacker for him is going to be extremely difficult. He's going to be more of a safety that drops down to the nickel. That's what he did a lot in college, playing in the nickel, and he did extremely well. And that's probably where he was the best at. He's got solid range to work in a cover 2 system. He can still drop down and play the box. It's just not consistently great. But what he can be is he's got the size, he's got the physicality. And sometimes when watching him, it's like this dude has eyes on the side of his head and on the back of his head. His awareness and coverage is just extraordinary. I don't want to say this and overhype him, but it's exactly what he is. Because especially with how Bronco fans are with wanting to eliminate tight ends, he can be a tight end eliminator in the NFL. He's viewed as this linebacker box safety hybrid that the NFL has really struggled over the years to figure out ways to make them work. We've seen them fail time and time again, but he shouldn't be pigeonholed into that because of his work in the nickel that he's done. And he's a good athlete. He's got enough quickness. He's got enough change of direction ability to work in the slot as your nickel and still uncover tight ends. And then he can still sort through the trash and get after the ball carrier. Just want to try to keep him clean a little bit against the run where he can get kind of washed out. This is a guy that I think really can fit with them. I think he's more safety than linebacker, but Isaiah Simmons, with how Vance Joseph has used Isaiah Simmons, Mapu is one that comes to mind for using that similar role, because last year Isaiah Simmons ended out as a boundary cornerback because of injuries that were sustained to Byron Murphy. Marco Wilson missed some time. So Isaiah Simmons got moved outside, and he's still not the greatest, but just being this versatile defensive piece, that's Mapu. And yeah, he's one of the guys that I'd really love to see in Denver with Vance Joseph being brought in.
I really like that you went to Isaiah Simmons on that one, because I was actually kind of thinking the exact same thing when you were explaining him the other day to us, and after listening to this breakdown, that's almost exactly like the way that they used Isaiah Simmons. The one thing that I would like to see a little bit more is with Mapu is the ability to line up in the A gaps, because that's something that Vance Joseph really likes to do, especially on third and long situations. where he'll line up both Zaven Collins and Isaiah Simmons in the A gaps with a zero technique nose tackle. And he's going to show a simulated pressure, whether they're going to come or not. He's going to show that we have pressure coming up the middle. And then a lot of times what he'll do is he'll bring Zaven Collins on the blitz and drop Isaiah Simmons back out into coverage, get him out into that shallow nickel area and try to use him as a zone coverage defender. He played him in the slot as well a lot, especially early on this season. But you're right. They played him outside on the boundary later towards the end of the year. Mapu there sounds very, very intriguing to me. Another player that we don't know exactly what this guy is. And there's a lot of different conversation going on in the chat here. We've got Todd Ostendorf asking, are people suggesting that we're moving Baron Browning again? And someone up there earlier, I wanted to find it, but I can't, said something about putting Baron Browning as a linebacker. Something that you had kind of mentioned a little bit earlier was how Vance Joseph likes these, I'll call it a positionless linebacker, where he has a safety linebacker hybrid or a linebacker edge hybrid. Is Baron Browning a player that can kind of do that? Because I remember going back a couple of seasons ago, Vance Joseph ran a specialized package where he had 5 linebackers on the field and 6 secondary players. The 0-5-6, and everyone's like, what in the hell is this? And he's running crazy blitzes, exotic stunts, and stuff like that. Baron Browning, to me, seems like a player that you could use as a blitzing linebacker, but also as an edge player. What do you think on that, and how does he fit in Vance Joseph defense?
Yeah, he should stick at edge. Honestly, he was moved around a lot in college from edge to off ball, and he talked about it after he was drafted. Vic Fangio talked about it. He didn't have time to settle down at one position, so he was still considered quite raw because he was just constantly bouncing back and forth. And now you're suggesting you do that in the NFL? When he was drafted to be an edge linebacker. And I think that people don't realize this. Vic Fangio ended up putting him as an off-ball linebacker out of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
He was drafted to be an edge. That's where they were initially traiing him. And then they had to move it because of injuries started to happen. And he got hurt and everything, and they just felt that keeping him as a linebacker was just better for him. But he was drafted to be an edge rusher, and that's what he needs to be. When you have him on the attack, when you have him moving forward, where you're limiting his thinking, he does so much better. I thought he looked fine as a linebacker, but you could tell that there was times of hesitancy, being overly patient, a lack of aggressiveness at times, because he's just thinking too much. And sometimes with players, the best thing you can do for them is cut it down. Quarterbacks, you hear it about all the time. You cut down their thinking. How do you do that? You cut the field in half. Well, moving a linebacker, instead of having to think about the whole field and the positioning of so many different players, so you don't run into teammates in coverage, so you don't lose track of your guy in coverage, have him attack the quarterback. He's athletic. He's got good enough strength. He's still developing his technique, but all the tools and traits are there to be a good, if not great, edge defender. And we saw it last year, especially early on. He hasn't been there doing that long enough to be like a Batman, and something we talk about all the time is Batmans and Robins as pass rushers. And he was a great Robin to Bradley Chubb, to Randy Gregory, to Draymond Jones. And then when those guys started getting hurt, when Chubb got traded, his play fell, but he also got hurt. So I think that moving Browning to off-ball linebacker is you're just slowly destroying him as a player. Leave him at edge and let him continue to develop. There's other guys that you could take a shot on at linebacker position that can bring some solid athleticism.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. I think Baron Browning, his best path to success is as an edge, utilizing that athleticism, utilizing the twitch that he has. He's got some decent bend for a player that's really raw at the position. And I thought his rookie season, he was just tremendous there. So I'm against moving him just like you are as well. Another big, just off the top rope, we're going to pivot here and go to the offensive side of the football because Deanna Hendry has a big question about the offensive line on a $30 per chat. She says, not happy with the VJ hire, but time will tell. What about free agency, like left tackle Orlando Brown Jr., center Garrett Bradbury? Who do you want on the offensive line? And go Broncos. I'm going to start here because Orlando Brown, I think, is probably going to price himself out of what the Broncos can get him at unless they trade Garrett Bowles specifically. Bradbury, I think, struggled a little bit at center in Minnesota. There's a reason why they're moving on from a former first-round pick. But the guy that I want your big opinion on here, Eric, is I believe he's a right tackle for the Atlanta Falcons. Caleb McGarry, who seemingly is a way better scheme fit than Mike McGlinchey ever thought of being for this Sean Payton offense, man. What do you think? Again, you can go to Mike McGlinchey here as well. Offensive line free agents, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Orlando Brown, expectation is he'll end up getting tagged or extended by the Kansas City Chiefs. They have a great offensive line, and they kind of want to keep it intact. So it makes perfect sense. Garrett Bradbury, he's the hot name at center. He's not the hot name for me, though. He's fine, but he's not great. He does all right as a run blocker, but his pass protection is such an issue that, like, you hear it with tackles, you do things to cover up tackles and pass protection. Well, the Vikings often had to do things to help to cover up Bradbury's issues in pass protection, which is not something you really want, because then it can kind of constrict your protection on the line a little bit. Something that Denver fans should know quite well, as they did it with Lloyd Cushenberry. I mean, if there's a center that I want, I kind of want to take a shot if he becomes available. Austin Blythe, the center that was with the Dogs. For tackle, I want Andrew Wiley from the Chiefs. He's a backup. He's a reserve guy for them. He's played multiple spots on the offensive line, and his play actually took a pretty sizable step forward this year for them when he did have to step in and, become a starter for them.
He played amazing in the season. Super Bowl. I think he started the season, and he was amazing in the Super Bowl going against Hassan Reddick. And Hassan Reddick had 7 pressures in that game, so he still got his, but they didn't get to Mahomes the way that everybody thought that they were going to, and Andrew Wiley was a really big part of that.
Yeah, he started the season. I couldn't remember for sure. He was a backup in 2021. But yeah, I mean, there are some down games for them, and it's not always going to be pretty with Andrew Wiley. And I know that this is going to frustrate a lot of fans. He's not going to be super expensive. He's not going to be break the bank guy for an offensive tackle, but he's a strong run blocker. He's solid in pass protection. And that's what you'd need for them, because the Broncos really, the way to fix their offensive line is through the draft. Like, you got to draft guys and you got to develop them. It's not common for you to fix your offensive line through free agency. I mean, everybody wants to talk about the Chiefs about it because, yes, they traded for Orlando Brown. They signed Thuney, but, they drafted Trey Smith and developed him. They drafted and developed Creed Humphrey. The Eagles, who have one of the most expensive guys in our offensive lines in the NFL, the Eagles, they were all drafted and developed by them. So, like, you got to go and get somebody for it. And without breaking the bank for it. And I think Wiley fits that bill.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And a big part of the problem here, to continue on with the free agent conversation here, is the Broncos, I believe, have $12 million in cap space right now. So Eric, you're probably going to have to pull some information here so I don't speak out of my rear end on this. But I know that they can get close to 35 or 38 million in cap space, which is a significant amount of money. Don't get me wrong, but you're not finding 4 offensive line starters with $38 million, and also filling in a cornerback need that you have to have, finding another running back, potentially a linebacker, another edge defender that you need to have some more experience out at the edge. You need an interior defensive lineman. You only have so many resources in terms of cap space right now that the Broncos could potentially have moving forward to, like, if you're going to go get Orlando Brown Jr., you're paying him $25 million a season. Garrett Bradbury is probably going to get $8 to $9 million a season at the center position. You're talking paying A+ money for B+ talent is something that Benjamin Albright likes to say a lot. I also believe that as well. Wiley, I think you're actually getting a B+ talent that's going to come at a B+ cost. So I agree with you that he would be a very intriguing option for me. Another guy that I think needs to be kept around, depending on what the cost is Dalton Reisner. He may not be the flashiest guy. He may not be the best left guard in the NFL, but he's at least a solid starter level, a guy that you can just kind of get by with. He wants to stay in Denver. I don't think he's going to cost a whole lot of money. So that's a guy that you need to kind of bring back around, help some continuity here, and with at least the players that are in the room that are going to be sticking around. So I don't think you're going to be able to find a whole lot of guys in the free agent market that are going to fit where you need to have them fit with the price tags. You need to have them with the price tag, fill all the needs that you have to have, and then be able to continue to develop an offensive line with only 5 picks this season. It's been since 2017 since the Broncos have drafted a tackle, period. Garrett Bowles was the last tackle that the Broncos have drafted. That has to change this year.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I know that a lot of people, they like to make that comment. Well, Dalton Reisner, because he was a tackle in college. Well, sure, but he was never drafted with the intention of being a tackle in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
He
Right.
was never going to be a tackle for the Broncos. He was drafted to be a guard for them. So you got to go back to Garrett Bowles for that. And tackle, I don't think he should draft tackle every single year. I think at the very least, it should be 2 out of 3 years. You're drafting a tackle late. I'm talking about late, a developmental guy, the guy that you can spend a year on, seeing if or year or two on and trying to develop a little bit. Running backs and quarterbacks are the only two positions you should draft every single year. But anyways, I digress. You got to do something for it. And it's like John Elway towards the end of the years kind of stopped valuing the offensive line because he saw the Peyton Manning effect that it had on the offensive line. And then he took a shot on Jawaan James, despite being told that he shouldn't by people who were familiar with Jawaan James, Chris Cooper being among them, or being one of them, with the knowledge that he had with his knee injury and his knees being pretty well shot. Took a shot on Menelik Watson. Like, he was trying to go for value guys that were valued because of the injuries they've had in their career. Which for me is a little bit of an issue. And that's something you have to watch out for every single year. And I've seen a lot of people talking about different tackles this year. Isaiah Wynn is a big popular one that I keep seeing for the Broncos. And as good as Isaiah Wynn is, I don't want him for about 50% of the snaps on the season and then having to sit there and spend on a backup too, because he's only going to give you 50% of the snaps this season.
Yep.
And injuries happen, but I want a guy who's going to probably give you at least 80% of the snaps because he's reliable to stay on the field. And that's not Isaiah Wynn.
No, I agree with you on that one. Michael Ronquillo, speaking of offensive line, jumping in here, saying, Lance and Eric, what do you think about the center, Joe Tippmann from the Wisconsin Badgers? Eric, I have not got a chance to really dive into his tape. I've seen a little bit of him, but I haven't really gotten much of an opinion on him yet. I'm going to let you take this one away for us.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty close to the number one center for me in the class. John Michael Schmitz is just slightly ahead of him, but I really like Joe Tippmann. I think he's got, the scheme versatility that you want. Doesn't matter what you want to do up front. He's a smart center. He's solid. And he's reliable in pass protection. There's some technical lapses that he has, and if I remember correctly, he has a pretty bad habit of getting a little high in his pass protection. Can't remember for sure. Don't have my notes up in front of me at the moment. But I really like him, and he's a guy that I think that one of those third round picks, if you're keeping both of them, and you still need a center because you didn't sign one in free agency, Joe Tippmann is one of the guys that I have right in that range that I like for the Broncos.
Nice. Yeah, like I said, I can't wait to dive into him. I haven't really gotten into the interior. I've been spending a lot of time with tackles over the last couple of days. DeJuan Jones is one that I am just in love with. I think that the big frame, the big body that he has, and still have the ability that he has to move, and the snatch technique that he plays with is just incredible. So that's a guy I really like. Darnell Wright, I think, is probably better moved off to the inside. So if you can go Tippmann and Darnell Wright back to back in the third round, dude, that's a really good way to start beefing up this offensive line, at least from the sound of it, based on what you said from Joe Tippmann there. Let's see, we got about 15-ish minutes or so, guys. There's a really fun conversation going on in the comment section here. I want to kind of dive into, Eric. A bunch of people talking about players that they missed. Champ Bailey's one, Bill Romanowski's another one, Elvis Dumerville, Carl Mecklenburg, obviously. So I want to throw this to you, and guys, get super chats and stuff in here. We want to have some fun with this. Get some super chats. So that we'll read a whole bunch of these if we can. Eric, let's go offensively first off. Give me a player from a former Broncos team offensively. I know one directly off the top of my head. That's not John Elway, by the way. One player that you would insert onto this team right now that would make them so much better than what they currently are.
Quick, I had to pull up my notes on Joe Tippmann, and one of the first things is he's tall for a center. He's listed at 6'6" or 6'7" on the Wisconsin website. That would be interesting to watch. They're in Denver. Anyways, offensive side of the ball, talking about in their prime, right?
Yeah.
And Ryan Clady.
Ooh, that's a good one. I didn't think about that. Dancing Bear, man, one of the best pass protecting tackles that we've seen coming out of the draft, and then for 7 years in the NFL level, dude, that'd be really fun. Are you playing him on the left side and moving Garrett Bowles, or do you think Clady moves to the right side, or are you getting rid of Bowles just entirely?
I mean, with the conversation that they want to move on from Bulls, like there you go, you move on from Bulls. Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the idea of moving Bulls to the right side with how long he continues to struggle on the left side, and other concerns that there are with him. I wouldn't want to move him. So it's essentially you gotta go.
Yeah. William Hayes jumping in here saying Gary Zimmerman. That's another good one that I wasn't thinking about. Scott in the group chat for us on our side says the center, and that's the one I was immediately going to. Like I was like, was it Schlereth? No. Dan Neal? Probably not. No. Tony Jones?
Tom
No.
Nalen.
Tom Nalen. The dude should be in the Ring of Fame. He should be in the Ring of Fame. He should be in the damn Hall of Fame. Tom Nalen is the guy that immediately jumped out to me like, you put this guy as the pivot man and just let him go to work, man. He's not the biggest guy, definitely stronger than what his physical presence looks like. Moves around really well, super smart, gritty, and quite honestly, one of the best stories I ever heard about this guy. I don't know if you remember this, Eric, but back in the late 90s, early 2000s, the majority of Tom Nalen's career in Denver, there was a zero talking to the media from the offensive line. You weren't even allowed to do the intro games on or the intro names on Sunday Night Football where the players read their name and then what school they're from. You weren't even allowed to do that. And Tom Nalen was a big reason for that. We're going to just shut the hell up and go to work and let our players do the talking out on the field. We don't need to talk to you behind the scenes. And with Nalen, there was a story that I read about him a while ago. I believe it was Dan Neal, who was coming into a free agency at that particular point. Was talking to a reporter in the locker room, and Tom Nalen sat there next to him and was just continuing to get redder and redder and redder in the face. And when the reporter got up and walked away, Tom Nalen damn near fought Dan Neal in the locker room saying, I can't believe you broke our rules. They fined him and did a whole lot of different crazy things. But that, to me, that mentality of just shut the hell up and let's go to work, I like that from Tom Nalen. To add him to this team would be just absolutely amazing. Defensively, there's one that I really like. It's in here in the chat as well, but there's another couple that I like as well. Obviously, Champ Bailey's a big player here. What do you think on the defensive side of the football, man?
Von Miller. And you want to know what? It's a damn shame they didn't even give Miller a call last year.
Okay.
What? It is. I mean, he was a free agent. But Von Miller, he's one of the best pass rushers to ever play the game.
Mm-hmm.
You have struggled to get after the quarterback after you make significant moves. Struggled to get after the quarterback after you trade away Von Miller. Struggled to get after the quarterback after you trade away Bradley Chubb. Injuries have taken their toll. Von Miller, yes, he suffered injuries, especially this last year and everything, but he is just such a damn good player. And there are plenty of others that I could think of that I could talk about. I mean, I saw somebody mention Steve Atwater. Steve Atwater in modern football is kind of a bit of an issue with the way the NFL game has shifted, but he was still a great player, and he was so smart. Champ Bailey was a name that came to mind. Al Wilson,
I was just about to say.
But again, he's another one that is a little bit, outdated a little bit. Elvis Dumerville, I saw somebody mention him in the chat earlier. There's a lot of guys that come to mind, but Von Miller, he stands out. He was a guy that a lot of times he took over games, especially in his prime. I mean, without him, we don't have a Super Bowl.
No, I don't disagree with you on that one. And DeMarcus Ware as well in there.
Super Bowl, to be clear.
Yeah, I knew we were going with that. DeMarcus Ware was another big reason for that game being as dominant as it was. The no-fly zone in general. Aqib Talib, man, he would be really fun playing for VJ. The press man stuff that he was able to do and just locking down guys. He would be one. I have to go back to Al Wilson, though. And I know, like you said, and Naj jumps in here as well saying Al Wilson. I believe it was John Fields said Al Wilson as well. That was the second name that came to mind. The first one was Steve Atwater, because I think that you put Steve Atwater as a linebacker, and he's just an absolute menace in today's NFL. But Al Wilson, specifically talking about VJ's defense and what you like to do there, you're talking super fluid, super athletic linebacker, stupid fast, a hard hitter, and a damn menace in the A-gaps, man. Al Wilson in VJ's defense specifically, so long as you could keep him from dropping his head down and hurting his neck. Like that's how he ended his career on. He would be a great fit and a guy that I really would like to see back on this Broncos team. I wish he was around a little bit more often too. I know that guys like Rod Smith, Eddie Mack, and guys like that. Al Wilson, I think, has a little bit of a presence for the most part, but I think he kind of stays away after his playing career is over. He's pretty much just gone dark on everybody and really kind of stayed out of the fray. I'd like to have him around, if nothing else, maybe a coaching position.
Well, I mean, there for a while, there's some bad blood between Al Wilson and the Broncos
Mm-hmm.
due to stemming things from that injury.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But we've got about 10 minutes left, and I saw somebody mention a free agent and everything that was talked about that Denver's been linked to. I believe it was Jawaan Taylor. Yeah. I believe it was by Pro Football Network was where the initial linkage happened with Jawaan Taylor and being predicted to sign with the Broncos when the free agency period starts. And he's interesting. I like him. I like his play. I think he can fit well. He's not a guy who's fully lived up to the the draft pick that he was, but he hasn't been a terrible tackle either during his football career. He's one of those guys that I don't think you'll have to break the bank for. So it's like that's a sign that I could be on board with. I like Jawaan Taylor.
I do as well. I was actually at the draft when he was drafted. There was a lot of speculation he was going to be a first-round pick, potentially top 25 guy. Fell to the second round, taken by the Jaguars. Hasn't really lived up to that hype, like you said. But he's a powerful run blocker. I think the biggest issue that he has is he's not the best in pass protection. He doesn't have the lateral agility that you like to see with some of the speed coming off of the edge, but he still has enough upper body strength and he latches on really nice. So to me, I think Taylor would be a guy that I would like a lot, especially given the success that Sean Payton has had with his offensive lines going back all the way through the 2009 Saints. That's obviously a big investment for what the Saints like to do. They've taken a lot of first-round players at the offensive line position. So you get a guy that has that former first-round billing, a guy that has still a lot of upside. I think some better technical refinement from the coaching in his particular style of play would definitely benefit him in the best way, obviously. But with the lower cost. The high upside, that's a guy, and he's been relatively healthy. I don't think he's missed much, if any, time other than I think he was benched there for a minute for poor quality of play. I could be wrong on that, but Taylor would be one that I really am curious about. I don't think you got thoughts on McGarry. I want to jump back there. Go ahead and finish your thoughts on Jawaan Taylor, but I do want thoughts on McGarry if you get him.
Taylor has played over 1,000 snaps on offense every single year he's been in the NFL.
Okay, yeah.
He's just one of those guys that's reliable out there. And you're not wrong. Like, there's definitely issues for it. He has allowed 11 sacks the last 2 years, 28 in his career. Gives up a decent amount of pressures, penalized a solid amount, but he does extremely well in the run game. He moves well enough. He's got plenty of power, and it's just a matter of he's one of those tackles that he's a fine right tackle, but you just got to give him a chip from a tight end to give him a little bit of a boost in pass protection pretty consistently. He's just one of those tackles. And, well, the Broncos, they need to improve their tight end room. I know Greg Dulcich is there, but they don't really have a blocking guy, a guy who can really fit in with the chipping aspect that they need. So that's somebody that they can go and get as well. And there's options in the draft. I mean, Daniel Jeremiah today, he had his combine, conference call thing, and he talked about in the top 3 rounds, 11 tight ends is where he has graded. A little bit more than me. I only have 7 tight ends in that range, but 4 more are pretty close to it. I think actually 5 more are pretty close to it. So it's a good tight end class. And again, Denver, supposedly they're going to be focused on offense in the draft, and it would make sense to add a tight end, especially one that can help be that chipper if you go out and get a guy like Jawaan Taylor.
Yeah, absolutely. A guy that I know that you liked a lot is Payne Durham. I forget the school that he was from. I believe he had a fairly decent senior bowl. Good Purdue, thank you. I wanted to say Northwestern, but I knew that wasn't right. Anyways, so blocking tight end, not the best athlete, is not going to run very fast at all at the combine. Probably going to be a 4.87, 4.9 kind of a guy, but is a very good effort blocker from what I've seen on tape of him. So that might be an interesting pick for the Broncos in the late day 3, like a 6th round pick if they get the opportunity there. What do you think on Payne Durham, man?
I think if he runs below a 4.7, then I'll owe you something. I don't think he's going to run a blazing time, but 4.7 is the low mark I have set for him.
Okay.
I mean, he's not a great athlete by any means, but he's not a terrible one. He's long, he's got good size, he carries his weight extremely well, effort blocker, has solid technique, but he's also a pretty solid mismatch type as a receiver that you can't really trust linebackers against him because he can just, outreach them basically. And then he's not a guy who's going to be best against, or safeties are going to struggle against a little bit because he can just use his body to box him out a little bit. And he does that quite well. So he's just this well-rounded guy. He's kind of jack of all trades is what comes to mind. Not going to excel in any one thing. And there's enough versatility that you can drop him back and be your fullback, your lead blocker type. You can put him out in the slot and you can move him around and still see, some success with him. So, but Josh Wiley is another guy of that mold out of Cincinnati that I really like as well.
I watched a little bit of Josh Wiley the other day. Watching some Tyler Scott, and holy cow, Tyler Scott. If he's there in the third round and you want a burner of a receiver, that's the dude. Whew. Another couple of names here. We've got people dropping in here. One that would be really fun, and may this young man rest in peace, but Darren Williams coming back as a cornerback for this team. Incredible press man coverage cornerback. He'd be an upgrade over Damari Mathis. That would be another fun one to add to this team. There was another couple of ones here. Oh, Michael jumping in here. Michael Ronquillo with some stars on Facebook. Thanks, Michael. We appreciate it, buddy. A great show tonight, Lance and Eric on DVDD. Enjoy your weekend with your family. You as well, Michael. As always, go Broncos, and thank you for your support, man. There was a question that I wanted to get your opinion on, and I don't remember where it's at, but I believe it was talking about Terrell Davis and him being the Broncos' best running back in franchise history. Probably hard to argue with that, but I've got a hot take for you. If the Broncos didn't trade Clinton Portis for Champ Bailey, there's a very hard argument that you're going to have to me to say that Clinton Portis wasn't the best running back that's ever worn a Denver Broncos uniform. And even in the 3 seasons that he was in Denver, the dude was just phenomenal, man. Like that, it's a hot take for sure. Obviously, TD is the best. Floyd Little's up there as well, but Clinton Portis in the 3 years that he was in Denver, his first 2 seasons, he ran for over 3,000 yards. Like the guy was incredible, man, and arguably the most talented running back Denver's ever had.
Yeah, extremely talented. Injury started to derail his career there after a while. I think about that 4th or 5th year mark is when he started to get hurt. Speaking of running backs, I was actually just getting ready to mention this. Michael Ronquillo says CJ Anderson wants to be the Broncos running back coach.
Ooh, that's nice.
I actually wouldn't be opposed to bringing CJ Anderson as part of it, but not as the running back coach, as the assistant running backs coach personally.
Right.
But I'm curious to see who they're going to bring in for that. I mean, it's a room that they're probably going to overhaul a little bit. I'm interested to see it. I'm interested to see what's going to happen with the rest of the guys on defense, even though their main positions are full out. Matt Patricia has still been linked with a job, and supposedly, I know initial reports were about linebacker, but supposedly that was never actually the case. It was something else. Maybe, like a senior defense assistant or a running game coordinator option. Chris Richard, maybe he's another one, as a assistant secondary coach because they're keeping Christian Parker or
which
a
is
passing
a good
coordinator.
move.
Yes, it is. So I really like what they've done, and they brought in Bo Lowry for the head of health and performance, who was there with the Saints for a while, and a lot of players absolutely, point his way is with their success on being able to stay out there in the field. Drew Brees had a wonderful quote about him talking about how he extended his career. So I'm interested. That's a good hire, I think, and I'm just interested to see before we get out of here how the rest of the staff fills out because there's still a few positions left, but most of them have been filled up.
Yeah, the running backs coach, obviously the offensive coordinator, finding out if that's going to be Anthony Lynn or not, or if they're just going to make Joe Lombardi the full-time guy. Anthony Lynn also being the head running backs coach, offensive coordinator with CJ Anderson as the assistant. You might be onto something here. Last quick one here before we do the matters of business and get us the heck out of here on a Friday. Ryan Powell jumping in here, going back to the tight end position. How about the tight end from South Dakota State? It's like 6'5", 235 pounds, I think. That would be Tucker Kraft. For a guy that played at a lower level of college football, you really want to see them be like the man amongst the boys and dominate everybody. And Tucker Kraft was that guy, man. I really liked what I saw out of him. I need to do a little bit more on him, but from what I did see, effort blocker, moves really well, good length, obviously nice size. Erick, Tucker Kraft, man, what do you think? You're going to have to take him in the third round from the sound of it. Like he's a top 100 player for sure.
I think he's a top 64 player. Is where he'll ultimately go. I think I have him just outside of it, but I think he'll ultimately go in that. But Denver already has a version of him. They have Greg Dulcich. To me, they're just way too similar. Effort guys who need to clean up the technique that don't really have the power to be consistent blockers, mismatches, solid athletes at the tight end position that can really stretch the seam and attack the seam and create mismatches. So very similar players, and Denver doesn't need yet another type of tight end like that.
No, I actually agree with that. And like I said, I haven't watched a whole lot of them, but I did like what I saw. Anyways, I think, Erick, unless there's anything else you want to grab, I think we could probably get us out of here. Shannon Sharp on this team would be amazing. Anything else you want to grab here, or should we just get us out of here?
No, I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week when the Combine will be underway. Hopefully it'll be over in time so I can make it.
Yeah, Combine, man. It's always fun to have the Combine. That there's one player specifically that I really want to see how he runs, and that's Jackson Smith-Njigba. I watched a lot of him the other day doing my scouting report for him, and I really want to see where he runs. If he's in the 4.6s like Amon-Ra St. Brown, it's going to really solidify the third round grade that I have on this player. Good player. Don't get me wrong. He's going to be a great player at the NFL level, but I just wish there was more athletic upside. I want to see him. If he runs in the 4.5s, he'll probably jump into the top 64. But as of right now, I have a third round grade on him. Anyways,
I'll bet money right now he's a top 25 pick of the draft.
Oh, I don't disagree with that. I'm not saying that that's where he's. I'm not saying that that's where he's not.
I know. I'm
just
saying.
Like, you know what I mean, though. Like, there's
money right now.
Yeah, I'll bet he's going to be a first round pick. He's probably in the top 25, like you said. But I think that the scouting process behind it, to me, is where I'm kind of having some struggles with, because I see the route running, I see these football IQ, I see the hands and everything. And CJ Stroud did a lot of really nice things, putting him in a position to catch the football and create yards after the catch. But man, I watched the play against Indiana where if he was 4.4, he's hitting his head on the goalpost. But he's not 4.4, and he got drugged down from a linebacker from behind, running on a slant. He split the safety.
So you're knocking him for not being the type of player he isn't.
Well, and maybe that's where the DK Metcalf conversation comes into this thing, is for not understanding the player, that what he is and what he actually brings. I also was a little bit higher on DK Metcalf than a lot of people were. I had a first round grade on him, but I value athleticism. Regardless, it's another conversation for another day, man. We got to get out of here. With that, guys, thank you all for joining us here on Dove Valley Deep Divers. Stay in the conversation. Join us over on Facebook as well. But you can find me on Twitter by following me at Sanderson MHH. For Erick, at Erick Trickel. Also for Scott, at Scout Kennedy. Also, guys, while you're at it, please make sure you guys are following at Mile High Huddle. That's the mother account where you guys find breaking news and analysis regarding your Denver Broncos. Film breakdowns. We've got all of our draft content coming right down the pipe. I've got a Mamu Diabate scouting report going to be coming down here in the next couple days. We're just a lot of stuff there. Anything regarding the Broncos, follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle, and also youtube.com/Mile High Huddle Pod. It's a great way to also just continue on with the conversation, guys. MHHmerch.com. That's the new link to the merch tent. Get you guys a hat. There's t-shirts, face masks, coffee cups, anything regarding any of your fancies. Some for the guys, some for the gals. Anything you want, you can find at MHHmerch.com. And guys, 3 things everybody should be doing. We had as a ticker on the bottom of the screen for the majority of the show, but please subscribe wherever you guys are watching this. YouTube specifically at Mile High Huddle, but Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you guys get your podcast content, please subscribe to Mile High Huddle. Like every video and article you guys see across all social media platforms. And if you do love it, please share it, guys. It's a great way to help us out. It's the most important thing that you can do, because if without your guys' support, we couldn't do what we do best, which is cover your Denver Broncos. Now, Erick, like I said, man, any last words? We pretty much good to get out of here.
Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll see you next week. And yeah, just enjoy this time with no football, unless you're watching whatever league it came back for the 30th time.
Yeah, the XFL. Nobody cares. With that, guys, you all stay safe. Take care. Have a great rest of your weekend. And as always, go Broncos. We'll see you guys same time, same place next week.